Hey, what's happening to everybody? It is Robert Phoenix, and we are live on the Friday FARcast about 12:26 Central Standard Time, and I am here with, of course, Steve Thor Mercer. Steve, you want to brandish your hammer, Thor's hammer?
I got it.
Steve has come equipped today with Thor's hammer. And he's got the hammer in one hand and then the magic wand in the other, the tools of the magician. And speaking of magician, we have alchemist par excellence, Ben Balderson, with us today, all the way from the true and sovereign state of Cascadia. And it's not quite there yet, but Ben's working on that in spirit form. Welcome to the proceedings, Ben.
Great to be here. Great to be here. What a good day.
It is a good day. It is a good day. You know, while the deconstruction of the third dimensional plane and what we know of as consensus reality occurs before our very eyes, we are reconstructing a new reality, and we take part in that every Friday here when we bring people like yourself onto the show to share your insights and your wisdom and some of your knowledge. And today we're going to be talking about your work, which has to do with distilling and spagyrics and fermentation and living off grid. So it's going to be a really, really valuable hour that we're going to spend with one another. So thanks for being with us.
Absolutely. I couldn't be more honored.
So Steve, do you have anything you want to share before we bring you back on here in about an hour?
Well, I'm just excited to have Ben on. He and I have been friends for a little while now. We've talked, and he's so knowledgeable on so many different things, and we're really lucky to have him on. So just looking forward to another great talk.
All right, cool.
Okay.
Yeah. So Steve, we'll see you towards the end of Ben's time here. In the meantime,
Okay.
take that hammer into chat.
Love you, brother.
And use it when and where necessary. All right.
Go defeat some ice giants.
All right, guys.
All right. So there we go. We're gonna take Steve off video. Okay. And we're gonna take the cat out just for a second as well. So I'm gonna change Steve into an attendee. Now it's just me and you, Ben.
Excellent. Excellent.
So the reason why Ben is streaming from his vehicle is we talked about this before the show started, is that Ben is really living the off-grid life. And we're going to get into that. And he had a Wi-Fi connection, and apparently it was situated near the chicken coop because Ben's raising chickens. And you want to share what happened when you actually hooked that up and what happened with your chickens?
Absolutely. So in the like you said, I live completely off grid, so I have very limited plugins. And in the winter, before the spring hits, I personally like to start my incubations in the winter, so that way, come spring, my birds are eating the bugs because I don't use pesticides and things like that. So the birds are what's taking care of that. So I start the incubation early. That way, come spring, they're full size, they're ready to be released and just go crazy. So I bought some eggs because I wanted some specific chickens, and I put them in an incubator, and I have 2 incubators. And one was next to the Wi-Fi box, and one was clear across the other side of the house. So the ones in the next to the Wi-Fi box, I had a HughesNet satellite internet, and the Wi-Fi router itself, the incubator next to that, it has 48 eggs. Out of the 48 eggs, 45 of them did not hatch at all. And out of the 3 that did hatch, 2 out of the 3 were so deformed they died immediately. One had scissor beak and the other one had splay leg. And the one with splay leg, I've never seen anything like it. Its one leg was sticking out from behind it like a tail.
Oh my God.
And yeah, it was horrifying. And the other incubator, it had about 44, 43 hatch, and just fine. This is normal numbers. You always get a couple that don't. So I went out to my coop just to double check this. I switched to the incubators. I went out to my coop. I grabbed just a whole bunch of fertile eggs out of my coop and just split them up between the two incubators randomly and tried it again. Same results. The one next to the Wi-Fi box, almost all the eggs were dead and only a couple of them hatched, and most of those were mutated. So that was the end of Wi-Fi at my house.
So there we go. This is why Ben is streaming from his vehicle. And clearly there is an impact. And we've seen this before when people have house plants near their Wi-Fi systems, near their router boxes or their not the router, but the transmitter for the Wi-Fi, the plants will die. They will die. Or if they're young plants, they will not grow. So if there's any proof that we need that serves, that we're dealing with a high level of electrification and vibrational and cellular disruption, I mean, there it is. So, it's been introduced to us. It's part of kind of this new emergent 4D world that we're living in. We have to somehow, master the technology and harness it so it doesn't master and harness us. And I think that's really where sort of the street level kind of engagement is going to be moving forward in the 21st century. So Ben, I want to show people your website. It's not your website, it's your YouTube channel. And it's a really, really interesting YouTube channel where Ben goes through a lot of different how-to videos when it comes to distilling and fermenting. And we're going to get into a lot of this while we've got Ben on the show today. So here's Ben's YouTube channel. You can all subscribe to it. Now, do you have a show every Saturday night or every Saturday? Is that true?
I had, that's from my TV show. I actually had a TV show called Odin's Alchemy that was on every Saturday. They wanted to censor me, and so that ended up, I ended up leaving the TV show. Actually, I was supposed to be on a speaking tour in Europe this entire winter due to it, but I canceled all of that. I said, if I can't say what I want to say, then there's just no point to it.
Yeah, I think we're all running into versions of that these days. And so the apertures are getting more and more narrow for us to be able to speak our truth or share our wisdom and our stories with one another. And that's going to be, I think, part of the big challenge moving forward. But hey, we had Sonia on here a couple of weeks ago. The game changes. We change with the game, and we find different ways, different structures, different methodologies, and we evolve as a result of that. So let's get into your story a little bit. We're going to go over some of these videos. I'm going to come back to your YouTube channel, but let's get back to you and your story. And you're living off grid. Oh, before I do that, I wanted to ask you, because some people have asked me or have told me these are the certain kind of chickens you want to get. What chickens do you recommend for people if they want to have egg-bearing, egg-laying chickens?
For most people, and I'm saying this because most people don't have as much experience with animals. So one of your real easy animals chickens to deal with is going to be like a silkie. Those are extraordinarily human friendly. A smaller egg, but these silkies are just happy, friendly little guys. They aren't going to run away. They can't fly. And if you're wanting to incubate any eggs, a silkie is pretty much like having an incubator. Silkie moms will hatch anything. If she can fit on it, she will try to hatch it.
Okay. So the silkie goes right to the top. What's after the silkie?
After the silkie, personally, I really like the cream-crested leg bars myself. They lay a sky blue colored egg, and they're just a real hardy chicken. They don't have the feathered feet. So that's one of the issues with silkies is they have feathered feet. And any feather-footed chicken is much more susceptible to scaly leg mites, which is just a real nasty little predator that builds up in their underneath their skin there, just leaches the life right out of them. So I like those. They can run around a whole lot more. All in all, I have about 30 different kinds of chickens though myself. I like a
30
wide.
different kinds. Wow, that's pretty impressive.
You bet. Yeah, and I got about 5 kinds of turkeys. I've got guineas, peacocks, ducks. I've got 6 different kinds of ducks.
What's
You
the
bet.
secret to raising a duck?
Ducks are the easiest of the group. The secret to a duck, only secret to a duck is making sure they have enough water to get their happy little heads in it. If they can get because they've got to get their the air vents in their nose underneath the water at some point while they're eating. So you've got to give them enough of that. And then they like to dip under the water and splash themselves and wash themselves off. So if you've got a duck, a little pond, even a little kiddie pool, ducks are just the happiest things you ever saw. And they're really hardy. They don't have, I lose ducks the least out of all the birds. Chickens, I lose the most to like diseases and stuff. The turkeys don't really get diseases that I've noticed, but the turkeys also are completely free range. So occasionally a fox or a coyote or 3 weeks ago, my Tom took off for about 4 days. I've got a wild Tom and he just took off and then he came back with a girlfriend. So then I had an extra turkey. So that
you've
was
got
pretty
a lot of
neat.
different species of birds. You've got turkeys, ducks, you've got chickens, and you have peacocks. How do they all get along? Do they all kind of like hang out?
Yep. Everything is free range. At night, I shut them up in their coop. That's it. And they all will go in their coop at night, when all the predator animals come out, except for the turkeys roost up in the trees and so do the peacocks. But they all get along. If the chickens fight, like if there's rooster fights, it's hilarious. The big Tom turkey will come over and puff his chest up and push them apart. And it's pretty hilarious. So honestly, and I've also got cows, alpacas, goats, and I don't have any problems really with any of my animals fighting. But I must say I'm a vegetarian and we don't kill any of our animals. So I think that has a lot to do with it, that none of those animals, like I don't kill roosters. If there's extra roosters, they just run around. That's one of the biggest comments that I hear is aren't you only supposed to have 1 or 2 roosters and things like that because of fighting? And I don't have those issues. I have about 50 of them running around the yard.
Mm-hmm. So you're basically milking. Is that what you're doing with the goats and cows?
Yep. I've got milk goats and milk cows. My cows are an A2 milk. So most of the things that people hear about that is where milk's causing so many issues for people, that is an A1 protein in your milk. And an A1 protein comes from like your Holstein cow, your giant production cow. Now your cow that a normal person would just keep in their yard, like used to happen 150 years ago, because you couldn't go to the store. You went out and milked that thing off the cow if you wanted a glass of milk. That cow had A2 milk. That was I have Scottish Highland Dexters. I have a Galloway, a belted Galloway. These are smaller cows. They're only going to produce 2 to 3 gallons of milk, but it's going to be a milk that's completely digestible for a human. That's something we've lived with and lived in a symbiosis with for thousands of years. And the same thing with goat's milk. And then the goats obviously also eat all the brush and the poison oak, which is a real problem up here. And then the alpacas, we shear them every year and use that to turn into clothing.
So another feature of your life and lifestyle up there is that you're off grid as well.
Yes, sir.
So
Yes, sir.
I would assume that that's a combination of active and passive solar and whatever other technologies you've employed.
Yep, I've got now I've got 40 solar panels. So pretty much that pretty much takes care of my power, all my power needs. If my lab, sometimes my lab overruns it if it's rainy, and then I have to kick on the generator. I've got a backup generator, but almost all my power comes from solar. And then Old Cow Creek, which is a runoff out of Mount Lassen, cuts down right through my property, so I just pull my water right out of the river.
Do you do any hydroelectric or run any generators off the creek at all?
I really wish I could, but that's a situation with, so I have tier 1 water rights, which means that I'm allowed to irrigate and have as much farm animals as I want on my property. But tier 2 water rights gives you ability to put a generator in California. So this only applies in California.
Right.
Tier 2, you can put an electrical generator in there, but PG&E has a generator down the river from me where the rivers converge, so we're not allowed to put a generator in there, and they fly a helicopter up and down the river about once a week to make sure we aren't.
Right. They don't want you tapping into their power source now, do they?
No, can't take off their paycheck, you know. Somehow they get to use the free system and earn money from it, but I can't use it just to supply myself.
Right. So the theory, and I think it's a provable theory, is that PG&E is actually owned by the Rothschild family. So I don't know if you've looked into that at all. So they've got their hooks in PG&E and a number of energy. They're not really companies. They're more like syndicates. And so they've got their fingers in the power grid all across the United States and even the planet. So I'm also assuming you grow vegetables on your place too, fruits and vegetables?
Yes, sir. Yep, I grow permaculture, which is wonderful. That's one of the, if you want to know about life, permaculture is what's going to teach you. Understand that that's what as above, so below really is for, is if you can't understand things on a higher level, you break it down on a lower level and understand all things work the same. So when you start looking at permaculture and understanding the really important things like your soil biome, that's where all your power, all your nutrients come out of your soil biome. And that's something that commercially is completely gotten forgot. As a matter of fact, rather than build the soil biome, which a plant does not contain a stomach. So as the plant stomach is the soil. That's why the soil contains fungi, bacteria, and all those things break down the food of the plant and make it bioavailable, the same as the probiotics of your stomach do. Well, when we go through and we till that soil, that tears up that biome and kills it completely, which is part of why we have to turn around and put a broken down fertilizer, which is just like throwing a glucose tap into your system, into these plants. Well, while that energy might be readily available and you can use it, is that the best way? Absolutely not. This is why we can look at pictures from 100 years ago, 150 years ago, and the vegetables and the fruits that they were producing. You know, there's guys standing there with an ear of corn that looks like somebody's leg, you know, and they're standing next to a watermelon that you're not even sure how they're ever going to move it because it would take a crane to lift it up. Like, because they had a soil biome that was breaking down things in the right way and making it bioavailable. And now we're taking basically a glucose tap. And while that does keep the plant alive, does it do it right? No.
I think it's interesting that that the same word is used both on land and sort of biologically, and the word is terrain, right? So we talk about terrain with the land. We also talk about terrain as it relates to our gut and our intestinal flora, and it's an interesting connection between the two.
Absolutely. And that's, as an alchemist, that's when you start looking at these things and understanding that my stomach works the exact same as the biome of the plant. Like all these things, that no matter what it is, everything works basically the same, and everything starts, you start breaking it down. We've gotten to where science has compartmentalized themselves so much that they've become like semantic, where they will take and oh, well, it's not this exact little thing. And they start looking for the semantic differences rather than looking for the general things and the way things are all working the same. And then understanding that that might just be a slight variation, but the basic thing's still pretty much the same. And
Yeah.
so they've just lost sight of the general workings of things.
Yeah, I mean, we've moved into this world of hyper specialization, and when we do that, we certainly sacrifice sort of the connection, the interdisciplinary connection between all things, and so we lose our holistic relationship with just about any topic we dive into. Because if you go deep enough,
Absolutely.
it's all connected, right? It's all connected.
Exactly. It's no different than looking at the cogs of a machine. You could look at one single cog and make a judgment about the machine as a whole without, and you're not seeing all the rest. Just because this cog is doing that one thing, it's interrelating and working and mishmashing with everything else. You've got to take
You know
all
where
of
I
that
really
into
think
account.
that came about and became really part of our system is the Manhattan Project. And in the Manhattan Project, basically they parsed everything for the creation of that so-called bomb out to these individual people who had these individual skills, and nobody knew what everybody else was doing, right? And Robert
Right.
Oppenheimer brought it all together theoretically to create this thing. And it feels like that became kind of the de facto model for the 20th century, that we've all been kind of indoctrinated slowly into this global Manhattan Project with just a need to know basis.
It almost yeah, that's beautiful. And then you even look at when Henry Ford brought about the factory, where rather than one man understanding how the entire car worked and fit together, all of a sudden each person is just doing one specific task,
Right.
and there's no understanding of the whole.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
So
bet.
in order to live off grid, you've got to have a grasp on all these things and all these systems and how they all work together. And
Nobody is coming out to help me do anything. Middle of the night, the power goes out, the water shuts off, the animals have problems. I need to understand how to do every single one of those things and go out and be able to reasonably take care of it. And if I can't, I will I will not be able to eat. I will not, I will literally, my livelihood depends on this. I don't have a job that I go into and I pay other people to come do all these things for me. I do them. So
right.
if just like if I quit getting a paycheck, if things go wrong on my farm and I can't make that function, then I'm not going to survive.
So we're talking about ultimate responsibility, right? And because you don't have a job and you theoretical job or whatever that is, you are allowed in your own way ultimate freedom as well, right? You're free to choose whatever you want to do. You get up in the morning, right? You don't have to be somewhere, but you have a responsibility that actually supports your lifestyle and theoretically being free.
Exactly. Which is one of the things that has been a real the few people that approach me that want to live this, because it's become a real popular thing, oh, let's all go live off grid. That's one of the things that they don't understand about it. Like you see those memes that say, quit pay, let's not pay bills and we'll all just go live off grid. And it doesn't really work like that. I've still got to work all day.
Yeah,
I mean, not all day. It's not like a factory job, but I get up at 5 and I go do chores till like 7:30, something like that. And then I've got a couple hours I don't do much depending on the day. And then on and off, I'm working all day throughout the day. Anytime a little problem comes up, I am the answer.
right. So this is an interesting contrast to another part of your life where you're being off grid now. There was another part of your life where you were deeply in grid, and so in grid that you were actually incarcerated and
You bet.
were in a penal institution for 8 years and spent 2 of those years in solitary confinement. This is a stark contrast to the life you're living now.
Absolutely. It's I went from not even able to make a single decision, not able to provide for myself in any way or do anything, to I don't answer to anybody and everything is on me. And that's one of the things that people don't understand is when you're in prison or you're a welfare of the system, you aren't responsible for yourself. That power that they are taking, you give it to them. They're allowed to have that because you're not providing for yourself. It's the same as a parent and a child. You
Right.
know, you need to do what I say because you want to eat tonight.
Right.
would like-
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
You bet.
So, we talked a little bit about this, off air before the show, and Ben wound up actually being incarcerated for being involved in a marijuana sale for less than a half a pound of marijuana. What time frame was that? When did that happen?
Let's see here. 15 years ago now. Wow. Because then I did 8 years in the prison and I've been out of prison for 7, almost 8 now. So 15 working on 16. Yeah.
Those are 2 Saturn cycles, by the way, if you're at home counting. Where was that? What state was that in?
South Dakota.
South Dakota. So
You
did
bet.
you feel the elements there? Was it like really cold at times, or?
No, but you're unlike other prisons. Because of that, you are literally basically locked inside. Come winter, you do not get to go outside unless you have some kind of a job that requires you to do so. But yeah, you're trapped inside of a building for 6 months out of the year at the very least. And then obviously in confinement, it's not like on TV. South Dakota anyways isn't like on TV. You don't get any kind of time like that. Twice a week you're allowed out and you get 45 minutes to shower. They take you out of your cell and put you in a cage with a shower in it, and you're allowed 45 minutes to shower twice a week. Otherwise you go right back in your hole, and that's where you sit.
What was the food like in prison?
Horrifying. I have never seen anything like it. Numerous times I got in trouble because I'd walk right out of the chow hall and walk right up to the warden and hand something. Are you going to eat this? Because in South Dakota, they get all of their pork and all of their turkey out of the factory there, John Morel's. So anything that the factory can't sell to the public anymore, then eventually gets put back into a back room. And eventually when the prison asks for it, the prison will get it. And pretty much every time, by the time that happens, then it's green and gray and it's just horrifying. There was some peaches. One of my friends got fired from the kitchen because he says, because the peaches expired in it was like 2010 and this was like 2020 or something. It's like they had been expired for so long. And he says something to her and she goes, no, that's when they were canned. And he says, it wasn't the born on date. Hilarious. But yeah, and then once or twice a year, the state will come in, and every inmate knows the day that the state's coming in to do the food check, because that day the food is edible. And
right,
then for the entire
that day.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, ooh, this tastes decent. The state's coming today. And then as soon as the state's gone, it goes right back to the freeze dry or the freezer burned, no nutrition in it, just dead food. It's just horrifying.
Right.
And I was on I just went on a rice. There's a vegetarian diet in there. And so that's just rice and beans and a sandwich. That's what I ate every day.
Wow. And you spent 2 years in solitary confinement.
Yes, sir. And that's that it sounds horrible, but that was the thing that made me who I am. I was floating along through the system and I was just in there for marijuana. I wasn't anybody impressive. It's just South Dakota's crazy. The worst case scenario is I know a guy in there who got 15 years and did 15 years in prison for having methamphetamine in his urine. I'm not an advocate. I'm very against methamphetamine. I think it's a life destroyer. But do
Yeah.
I think somebody should get 15 years for having it in their pee? That's insanity to me.
Yeah.
Um, so South Dakota was just like this. And I was supposed to be getting moved to minimum security, and one of the guys in the building got a tobacco and a tattoo gun drop, and one of my roommates went out to pick it up. So everybody in the room got put into the hole and got put into high security instead of going to low security. Well, then I did the intelligent thing, and I caused all kinds of problems because I didn't have anything to do with that. So I decided to show them what I was capable of doing, and made a complete ass of myself and got put in the hole for a couple of years. And while I was in the hole, it's amazing that the first so many times you start out, and you're, especially being an inmate, you're angry and you're fully willing to blame everybody else and fully willing to pick every flaw that's ever happened in your life. And this happened, and if this wouldn't have happened, I'd be this. And you go through all of that, and where does it get you? So then I'm still stuck in the hole and still stuck in my head. And so eventually you start moving past those things, and you move on to things like, everything was my fault. I've made every single choice that I've ever done. I've screwed up. I did this. If I wouldn't have acted like this. And at the end of that one, it wasn't really right either, because that's not the truth either. While I am responsible for myself, did I create every single situation and action, and nobody else did things that I didn't have control of? So eventually and the fact is they say you go crazy, you start going crazy within 24 or 48 hours. So inside of that time period, well, 2 years into that, I've went crazy so many times and came back. I can't even count. And each time things are a little bit different. Last time it was everybody else's fault, and that wasn't right. And so this time it's all my fault, and that's not right. And this time it's just how it is. And eventually you just start breaking things down so damn much that it just is how it is. And you come out raw and real,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. So the reason I wanted, and we're going to get into your work with salts and distilling and everything, but the reason I'm going down this path, and we talked about this a little earlier, is that, for all intents and purposes, we have been in a lockdown, right? People have been shut in their homes. And now if they're not shut in their homes, they're shut in their faces because they're being required to wear masks. So for all intents and purposes, we've been placed in medical incarceration, and mostly against our will. And some places are better than others, obviously. But still, this is a current of our time now. And one of the things that I think is vitally important, and I've talked about this before in the show, and that's the cultivation of a mindset. And the mindset that will allow us to navigate through this period, which for really, what we're going through now is like a garden picnic to what you went through. What can you share with us about the cultivation of mindset and what people need to do in order to get through a rapidly changing time where their own personal freedoms may be curtailed more and more as we move through this current phase?
Well, one of the things I want people to very first notice is as you're sitting there by yourself, you're the one that's doing the suffering, you're the one that's doing the thinking, you're the one that's following those rules. You are making all of those choices. And as you're sitting there, your mind, the idle hands is the devil's playground. That there's a reason that saying became a saying, because when people just sit idly, mentally they start deteriorating. You see this situation with, like, today it's very popular to call the middle-aged housewife who doesn't work a Karen. And what's the big deal with the Karen? She's got too much money, she's stuck in her house with nothing to do, and when that happens, you get caught up into your head. So the first thing you need to start doing is getting back out. Understand that now that I'm in this house and I'm locked into this is my world. At some point, I would like to expand my world, but for today, this is my world and I am king of my world. I can set my world up however I like. Anything that goes wrong in my world is my fault. Anything that goes right in my world is my good. So I start taking control of all of those things. And maybe I don't like that I'm a pig, that I don't make my bed, I don't do dishes on a daily basis. Well, then start doing it. You've got nothing better to do. Maybe you don't like that you can't work on your own car. There's YouTube videos to do everything on the planet. All you need to do is go out there. You've got nothing but time now. Before, you've spent all these years caught in this rat race where you don't even have time to think. That, everybody talks about the hamster wheel and you can't even get off the hamster wheel to start making your own life. Well, now they have given that to you. And you need to take that advantage of that for everything that it is. Take and look at your world and truly make it yours. Take the responsibility for it. If I walk into my house and it's a pigsty and there's dishes on the counter and there's rotten food on the floor, that's my fault.
Mhm.
That's not the government's. That's not Bill Clinton's. It's not Nancy Pelosi. It's not Donald Trump. That's Ben's fault.
Mhm.
And Ben is the one who needs to fix it. And then I will feel better about that because now I'm not a pig.
Right. Right. So part of the mindset is taking control of what you can take control of in your
100%.
immediate space, right there.
100%.
Yeah.
And
Ownership.
as above, so below. When you start expanding that out, you will become more and you will get more control. You start practicing those same things as you expand out. If I can do this in my home, I can do this elsewhere. And you'll start realizing that all the time out in public, most of these rules that have been made are absolutely arbitrary. They're nonsense. You don't even need to pay attention to them. You just go do what you want to do and do what's right. And most of the time, nobody's going to stop you. Just yesterday, I went down to the clerk of courts and got a marriage license. My girlfriend and I walked in. We had my two grandsons with. Everybody's in there's masked up. We had to set an appointment. It's not an open public building anymore. We walked up. She says, "Do you have your masks?" And I said, "Nope. I'm not required to wear one. We have medical conditions." She looked at us and just, okay. And we walked right in. That was the end of the story.
Right.
It wasn't some giant fight. I didn't have to bust out my Facebook and get into a fight with police officers. And all I had to do was say no.
That's right. Right. Yep. Yep.
I-
I wasn't getting married, but I had a similar experience at Goodwill the other day. I walked in, they opened Goodwill back up, and I was looking for some exercise equipment, and they say, "Please wear a mask on the front of the door." Right? I wasn't going to wear a mask, so I walk in, and this woman who's working at Goodwill has a mask on. She says, "Hello, sir. May I get a mask for you?" I said, "No, thanks. I'm fine." Right? Boom. Move on. Didn't need to debate the mask thing. Just like, there it is. Now, when you meet second and third line resistance, that's a whole nother issue. And then you get to kind of work through things. But if you're clear initially, then those things get really demarcated. So mindset is an important part of where we're at, and controlling what you can and taking ownership and authority over your immediate environment is where it starts. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then when you do that, here's another key with the Karens. You notice that they aren't doing that. So when you aren't worrying about your own and controlling your own, then the next thing you want to do is control other people, control what they're doing, because they're obviously the problem. So now you need to control them. You're not really worried about your world and doing things, which again, this is your big signifier. These women typically don't have a job, don't do anything. Kids are grown. They are very bored. And the same thing happens to retirees. This is part of why the old farm boys that would sit around the table and just gossip like nannies, because they are bored.
Right.
They have not taken and developed their mind to understand that you could do something productive with it. Now that they've had their government issued job taken away, I've decided I'm going to become a mechanic, and once I don't have to be a mechanic anymore, once I don't have to do my compartmentalized specific job, I'm not liable for anything anymore. Now I don't have to be productive in the world and take active responsibility. Retirement is a horrible thing that got sold to people. Understand that you are all retired right now. This is what it's going to be like. That misery that you're feeling sitting in your house with nothing to do, and as you become more angry and unhappy, and as the suicide rates spike, that's retirement. That's you saying, I don't need to be part of a symbiotic life.
Well, the problem is, I mean, I think in some instances, retirement can actually be quite good if you have structured activities. You're able to go to the gym. You're able to play tennis. You go down to the
you have not checked out of life.
Cards,
You have not checked out of life.
All that's been taken away, right? So now you've got a whole group of people who had a recreational path, and a path that's connected with their community that's been completely disrupted. Now they've got to find some other purpose, and unfortunately, that has resulted into the rise of Karen culture. I want to talk to you about your work with salts, right? And that came up in the chat. People want to know more about it. So why don't we dive into that, and maybe you could talk about the importance of salts, different types of salts. Let's just jump on in there, Ben.
Absolutely. So everything on this planet is a carbon-based life form. And every single carbon-based life form, when we, as an alchemist, when you break them down, it breaks down into certain ways. So every single carbon-based life form has 3 levels of oil, and that's going to be your high ether. And then you're going to have your ego, which is your middle level, and that's going to be 3 levels of earth: carbon, water, and cellular material, which is your ash. That the cellular material was the egg, the housing for all of this stuff to happen. And then underneath that, you're going to have 3 levels of cellular salts. Each of those 3 levels breaks down into 4 levels on each of those things. So you end up with 12 cell salts. Now, when you start out with just a whole plant, and this is what applies to you and I as a person, to every carbon-based life form. When we start out with the plant, it's an entire thing, and we look at it, and let's take an elderberry. And this is a beautiful plant, and it's whole. But now we're going to take and break it down and make it into something else. So we understand that when it was just a plant, that the top 2 levels of oil were not bioavailable to us. So one of the first things that we're going to do is we're going to not only separate the oil out of it by making a tea, breaking it down and boiling it and making a tea and pull the oil out, we're also going to make these top 2 levels bioavailable. So with cannabis, a lot of people understand, because cannabis has been used medicinally so much. And with cannabis, when you just pick it off of the plant and you take that bud, you can't just throw that in your mouth and it won't have the same effect, because the THC level in there, it needs to be oxycarbonated, which means that the carbon molecule needs to be dropped out of the THC molecules, so that way it can now bind to you and become bioavailable. So in order to do that, it has to, this is where you're putting the things to the fire all the time with alchemy, is you have to heat it to 180 degrees, and this will start burning out the carbon molecule. And now we can have these things available. So this is going to pull the oil out of the plant material. We're going to put it in a bucket of water, put our plant material in there, heat it to 180. This is going to pull the oils out and make a tea, and it's also going to make them bioavailable. Now we're going to strain that out, and we're going to have our tea, which is going to ferment. So we're going to have a wine, and then we're going to have a pile of plant material. And now in today's society, essential oils everybody's all about it and everybody understands it. Well, this is what we've pulled out with the wine or the tea, is the essential oils. Now, after we've got it at that point, we take and we put this into a distillation. Now, the distillation, again, we're going to have heat. Each of those components inside of that wine will evaporate out at a different heat. So we're just going to slightly change the heat each time and then let it evaporate out. And in a distillation system, you take a liquid, you heat the liquid to evaporation, and then you catch that evaporate because it's a closed system. So it evaporates, it goes down a little tube, and then it falls down in, it gets cold again and falls down into another flask. Okay. So at the different temperatures, the different components in that liquid are going to start evaporating off and moving. So when you first find the first one, which is going to be your methyl alcohol, is going to be your most unstable component. And that's actually the one where they talk about with the old white lightning that'll make you go blind. It's that very first head, the head that's got to come off, because that's the most unstable. So you'll get that off, and then that's pretty much just trash. And then you rotate the heat up just a little bit, and you'll start getting your ethyl alcohol will start vaporizing off, and you catch that. And then some water. Well, you'll start getting into your levels of oil, and you're going to separate and each of those levels of oil just like that until you have 3 levels of oil.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then you can also take each of those levels. Well, now I've got a vial of pure THC, a vial of pure CBD, and a vial of pure terpenes. Now, the terpenes is the most unstable oil of the plant. That is where your flavor and your smell comes from. And that applies in every plant. That's going to be your terpenes, your flavonoids, whatever people want to call them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easy to see that with food, because when you cook food, the smell burns off first. The food's not completely dried out, but the oil is vaporized, hit your mouth, hit your nose. Now, here's where we start getting a real good understanding of what's going on. Because when that oil hits you, what happens? Your mouth starts watering, your stomach starts gurgling, you produce bile, you're getting ready. That oil has now created a void in you. It's the feminine, the oil side in a plant is feminine and the salt side is masculine. So the feminine side opens up the masculine side and makes it bioavailable.
Mm-hmm.
So we've already seen this with these oils now. The very first level, the terpene levels coming off, that's where all your flavor and all those things come. And that creates all these different reactions in your body that makes you want to take it in. Then you get up to your, with marijuana anyways, you move up to your CBD level, which is a pure clear oil. It has almost no taste, no smell, but that's where you're going to start getting your more medicinal effects. Mm-hmm. And then again with THC.
Mm-hmm.
So, but again, these oils, the essential oil is the feminine side. That's opening up the pathway. Mm-hmm. So even when you take in the THC and you feel that high is a void, the same as hunger. Mm. You know, you can very easily equate the two feelings if you've experienced them. Now, what that void is looking for is the salt. So what's gonna stop that hunger and bring that back to balance? Putting the salt into the body. Take in that food and eat it. I've created the void, now I need to fill it. Mm-hmm. So if we look at this electrically, this is voltage and amperage. Voltage is the pathway or the feminine, and it's opening things up so the amperage can go. The amperage can't go anywhere without the feminine.
Right.
That's in. So we've got the oils. That's what those are doing. They're your voltage. Now what we've done is we've burned out our earth elements with this fire. So when I talked about the oxycarbonating, mm-hmm. There's carbon in that wine that needed to come out. We got the water out of that. Now we turn around and we're going to switch down to the body portion, and we're going to light that on fire. So the first thing with the nigredo that's going to happen is that entire plant mass is just going to turn pitch black. This is the nigredo. This is the blackening. This is activated carbon. Okay. So if you're actually making activated carbon or biochar, literally all you need to do is take hardwood from a good hardwood tree like a manzanita or an oak and reach into the bottom of the fire and get them glowing red coals, dump that into some water, pull it out, grind it up, and you'll notice that's horribly expensive activated carbon.
Wow. There you go.
Yep. You bet. So so all you're doing is that fire is activating the carbon at first. Then you keep going with the fire, and now the carbon starts getting released, and you'll see the whole pile turn. It'll move from black to a gray, and you keep turning it up, mixing it up, and spinning it. And then if you ever do this project, which I highly recommend to everybody, you're going to notice the nigredo portion. That's life, baby. Every time you think you've conquered something and you think you've moved past something, and you go and stir the pot like life likes to do, and all of a sudden it's black again. You're like, really? How's it black again? How's that even possible?
Right.
And but you keep doing it over and over, and eventually you will burn all of that out. And you're left with a whitish gray mass. And so this is going to be your cellular material, because the carbon was released with the fire, the water was released. So now you're going to have your cellular material and your salts, and then a little bit of metals, which the metals are also going to stay in this. So you mix that pile with distilled water. We're doing that with distilled water because distilled water has no salts of its own.
Right.
With your experiment, what we're trying to do is purify these salts, so we don't want to add our own salts. So distilled water, we mix that up into a soup, and then we strain that out real nice until it's clear water again. And then all you have to do is evaporate off the water. What you're going to find is a pile of pure salts that you can scrape up that look just like a table salt. So now we understand that we had the essential oils was your feminine part. Your ego was your body, your water, and your carbon. Well, now we're down to your masculine side, your stable, dense salt side. And we're going to find that every carbon-based life has 12 cellular salts. And these cell salts is where your power comes from. This is the amperage in the equation. So if we're going to look at the plant or the human or the dog electrically, the oil is the volts, the salt is your amperage, and the ego or the carbon, water, and cellular material was your ohms. So that's what was stopping the communication, the pure communication between your oil and your salts. So now that we've gotten rid of all these things, and we understand what happens with the oil side, that's creating a void, now we can alchemically marry the salt to the oil. And now we've got amperage and voltage, and we can do something with that. Now we're talking about usable power. The same applies with medicine. This is part of why, like Rick Simpson oil. If you look at Rick Simpson oil as compared to, everybody go look up Shatter or Dabs, you'll notice that that's completely clear, beautiful. You'll look at Rick Simpson oil and it's very black and nasty. Well, he's doing a dirty extraction. So he's still got the salts in there. That's part of why his is working so well. Where with essential oils, you have completely stripped it of its salt power. Right. You're working off of just oil. You're only creating the void, which in some instances is useful. You know, I had an alpaca, a dog, my neighbor dog came over and went into my alpaca herd while I was shearing, and the mom alpaca attacked me.
Yeah, I was gonna ask what happened to your finger.
Yeah, she put her tooth clear through here, and it came out this side and then snapped off in my finger. I was like, oh, that was horrible. But so I've got a poultice on this right now, and this poultice has all oils because I'm trying to draw. I'm trying to pull. I'm not trying to feed into it. So, you know, I'm not saying that the feminine doesn't have medicinal value. saying, sometimes you're trying to pull away and sometimes you're trying to fill in.
Right.
When you need to fill in, you need that masculine.
Right. That makes sense. That makes total sense. So, did you get married? Like, you got the license. Did you get married?
Nope. I'm going to be getting married here in the next couple days.
Next couple of days. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's a whole nother level of alchemy, isn't it?
You bet. Joining that masculine and feminine again. She is absolutely my oil in life. Again, we can, as above, so below. You could take and you can look at the feminine, and the feminine always draws out the masculine. If it wasn't for women, we'd still be living in caves, wearing underwear and grunting, and we'd maybe shower once a year. That's because it rained outside while we were out there. Like, men are very stable creatures. A college student proves that to you every day. You walk into a college boy's room and he's got a chair and a TV and he don't care about nothing else. Like, yeah, this is good. I throw my clothes over in the corner over there. It's good. I eat. They don't really want
it's true,
those.
because when I've had, women, come over to my place and spend any considerable time hanging out with me, the energy's changed, right? I mean, there's a different charge and a different vibration that's been, I wouldn't say left behind, but it's been drawn into the space.
Exactly. Now you need to do something to make yourself worthy. You need to do things. Right. I need to go, God, I need to clean myself. Oh, she's not going to like that. I need to go shower and maybe get some nice clothes. And hey, I've got, my hut's nice. I make hut nice. You want to stay in my hut, So this is the way this works. And as soon as Christy wants something, then about half a blink later, my brain is going, well, do we need that? And if we do, how do I get it to her? And immediately we're talking about, I'm putting the masculine push into that.
Right.
So this is just the way that life works. And I was actually a hermit before that, and a real happy hermit, but obviously I'm happier with this.
Well, congratulations. I feel like we're just kind of scratching the surface with your world, and there's a lot more to talk about. We really didn't get into spagyrics and fermentation today, so let's consider this kind of an initial meeting, and I want to bring you back and and go a lot deeper with your work, because clearly you've got a lot to share, and people in Chatlandia are very switched on. A lot of them are herbalists. Some of them are spagyrists. So there's
love
a lot of common language that you'll be able to share. And I'm real interested in you using your environment as kind of a laboratory in R&D, in what you're able to gather from the natural world and do some interesting things with that maybe you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So how does that sound?
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, we'll get you back on here, Ben. You're a great guest, and I think a really valuable resource. Let's bring Steve back in and see if he's got any questions or any comments from our folks.
Hey guys.
Scotlandia.
What's up, brother?
Hey.
Let's give him the video here.
My video. Here I am.
Here you go, Steve.
Okay, great talk. Yeah, there's so much more to talk about. We could spend 2 or 3 more hours. Yeah, one good thing about Christine is she's a massage therapist also. So that's a good benefit.
Yes.
Yeah, so we'll definitely have you back on. Everybody loved you in the chat, and they know you from Crow and from Freeman and different ones. So yeah, everybody, search Ben, and there's a lot of other talks and a lot of other information on the. And
then my website is heathenwizards.com, and I have most of the shows up on there also.
I've got some of your wizard wax right here. Good stuff.
Oh, you bet.
Yeah,
you bet.
So I'll leave links to Ben's website and his YouTube page in the show page so you can go and check out his world. And we're going to get you back on real soon. And maybe
Great.
right around the summer solstice, even. That might be a good time to have you back on.
Oh, I'd love that. That would be, especially this year. This is so much building up right now. Wow.
Yeah. Seems like a good opportunity. In the meantime, go back to your little slice of heaven, and thanks for being with us, Ben.
Thank you. I couldn't be more honored.
All right, brother. Thank you so much.
Take good care now.
Love you guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Back. Well, that's pretty awesome, huh?
All right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we're gonna have Lark in Texas going to join us here in a second. I'm going to bring him on, and just to give you guys a little bit of background, Lark came to me through some folks who follow 15 Minutes of Flame, and really were adamant that I needed to have him on my show. And I listened to them, and it's like, okay, well, let's check out his website. And I went to his website and sort of dove in a little bit. And Lark and I had a great conversation yesterday for about an hour. And Lark's specialty is understanding this idea and this concept of communitarianism, which we are being indoctrinated into. And I'm going to bring up his website, and we're going to go through a bunch of stuff, and it's going to be quite enlightening because Lark has been at this for quite a while, and we're going to get sort of the historical roots and context of communitarianism and how many of us have been essentially indoctrinated into this idea without consent, without volition of our own will. It's going to be an interesting conversation. Steve, you got any thoughts on communitarianism or this whole idea of utopianism that we're about to dive into here?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how that ties into the New Age movement.
Well, we're going to get into that for sure.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, with New Age, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. Lark's been on it for quite a while. Why don't we bring him in here? I'm gonna promote him up, and then he's going to be joining us here. We're going to throw the old talk button on there. And if he wants to, let's see, where is he now? Where do you go? If he wants to, we can do video. We'll ask to start video. We didn't know if we were going to do video yesterday, but let's see. So that's it. And there we go. There he is. Hello, Lark. Okay, you're muted right now. We got to get you to unmute, brother.
I think I'm unmuted.
There you are. Okay. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks. I enjoyed listening to you and Benjamin there for a bit. Quite interesting.
It's the three guys with glasses segment of today's show. So.
Mine are to take away from the glare of the screen.
Okay.
And also I've been doing a little bit of gardening work this morning. So.
Okay. Well, good. It's kind of an organic sort of theme here. Steve, we're going to bring you back in at the end, hang out with Chatlandia. And if you have any, and thanks for sending me some of those texts during the show. I was able to kind of pick up on that. Right. So if there's anything that comes up, just shoot me a chat and we'll bring it into the conversation. Okay.
Okay. All right. Talk to you later.
Okay. So we're going to bring Steve back a little bit later. And we're going to there we go. All right. So welcome. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks. I'm delighted.
So you were telling me yesterday you were in your late 60s. You certainly don't look that way. You are rather youthful there in your countenance. Must be all that good living, all that good Texas living, right?
I don't know about that. Perhaps it's the genes. I have always been thought of as looking younger than my actual age.
Right.
So when I was 30, I probably looked 20. When I was 50, I looked 40. And so kind of rolls like that.
Right. Yeah, I sort of had something similar in my own life. Let me try. I got to get your website up here. That's my next order of business. Hold on. And I know it's in here. I know it's in my.
I posted something new this afternoon
Okay, good.
or
Well,
earlier today. Yeah.
we'll check it out here. There it is. Let's bring it on up here. One sec. Let's give people an ability to see this and grab your website there. All right. So this is Lark's website, Lark in Texas. You're not what you think and you're not what you say, but you are what you do. You can learn more about that. So let's check out your new post. What do you got today? Let's see what you got. Let's scroll down.
Trust your gut.
Yeah, it's funny. We were just talking about the gut earlier in the terrain, and how it's connected to the landscape and also the digestive system. So let me just try and find it. It's a little glitchy here sometimes. We'll scroll up. Let's get into your background just a tad. You've been down this rabbit hole for how long would you say? 20, 25 years, 30 years now? How long?
Well, I think it's fair to say all my life.
Yeah.
I always was questioning, always challenging. And of course, my persistent questioning was a nuisance to a lot of people, as you can imagine.
Yep.
But I was pretty much resolved to trust my gut, come hell or high water.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've made a lot of twists and turns like we all have in our lives. And I'm certainly error prone like everyone else.
Mm-hmm. Right. We're all imperfect works in action. Right. So.
I know that with the rest of the life that I have allotted to me, though, I want it to be my life.
Right. All right. So here we go. We've come upon your latest post right here. As soon as it stops, I'll bring it up here. And there we go. So one of the things that I found out yesterday that you and I had in common was that not only did we live in the Bay Area and San Francisco, we actually hung out at the same punk rock club, which was the Mabuhay Gardens.
That place was incredible. 400, 500 people.
Yeah. It was amazing. You kind of had to be there, right? It was one of those places on earth at kind of a specific time that you just had to be able to understand. And it was run by this really cantankerous guy by the name of Dirk Dirksen. And he was a real character. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the whole kind of punk rock ethos and that whole independent spirit and DIY, which really seems to have been stripped out of our culture these days. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, that period of my life was probably the most interesting and the most exciting, but it was a mile a minute kind of a lifestyle, I have to say. And it was a bit hedonistic in a lot of ways. But, I was married to a Christian girl from a small Texas town whom I met on her summer break from a Christian college in Oklahoma. And in 1980, we were divorced. And at that point, I gave her all my friends, all our friends, and decided that I could reinvent myself. I could be who I wanted to be. And that was what was exciting about that particular scene, which is centered largely around the music and the fashion, if you recall. And I don't know, believe it or not, I started in Fort Worth, Texas. And I don't know if you know this, but 13th Floor Elevators played in Texas. They were inspirations to Jimi Hendrix, for instance, the psychedelic scene from the earlier 60s period. And so, too, I was fascinated by the themes that were being drawn into lyrics of the music, particularly as it's centered around Americana, if you will, and particularly some of the 50s and early 60s songs. And naturally, it was the fashion that interested me. Now, what was interesting too is I'd always had a flat top or a crew cut, except until I was around 16 years old. And the reason is because I grew up in a pretty strict Air Force family. And so I was able to, which was a haircut that I was familiar with, a flat top or a crew cut. And then I simply let the back grow out. And all of a sudden, people were saying that I was Fort Worth's first punk, which I found rather interesting, because I didn't really relate to punk. I admitted to myself I liked the new music and I was intrigued by it. But then I started meeting some of the people. And believe it or not, even in those days, in the late 70s, early 80s, they were in Fort Worth and Dallas. A popular band in Dallas was called the Telephones with an F. And a popular band from Fort Worth was called the Fort Worth Cats, for instance. And you can still find their music on YouTube.
If I'm not mistaken, I think the Sex Pistols actually played Dallas, right? That was one of their stops, wasn't it?
It was, yes. Yeah, and of course the English music that was coming out was fascinating to me as well at the time, and particularly the English beats. Although indeed I listened to the Sex Pistols and all of the influences of the time, like Bowie, and I don't know, I can't even think of their names anymore. I'm so far removed today from that whole world.
Well, I had a confluence of the English beat meeting Texas when I saw the English beat in San Francisco with Joe Carrasco opening for them. That was a great show.
Oh, Joe King Carrasco. I'm glad you brought them up. What a fun band they were.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing I really like,
Texas band.
Yeah, the thing I like about that time, it has to do with the fact that people had kind of a semi-responsible attitude around anarchy, right? Because this whole idea of anarchy in self-rule and being able to kind of create either in the moment or create a lifestyle was part of that ethos. And of course, connected to that was a form of rebellion against, the corporate structures, which is what punk rock really grew out of. And again, there's cul-de-sacs with a lot of these genres and movements. Nothing's perfect, but it was an interesting time, and it feels like that time, or the spirit that was associated with that time, is completely gone. It's completely devoid from our culture. And this whole spirit of rebellion and responsible anarchy has now been boiled down to not wearing a fucking mask. I mean, that's what it's come down to now, really.
Yeah, I think we've lost a bit from that time, and it's sobering to think that a lot of those folks are our age now.
Yeah.
Some of them are dying off, and I actually have communication with a man in England who knows people in the beat, knows them personally. And I find that fascinating, because I thought that was from a musicians, from just pure musicality. I thought they were the preeminent band of that time. But the thing to remember in my case is that I essentially, after 1986, was no longer involved in the scene. So it was short-lived, but I packed a lot of living in those 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, Absolutely.
San Francisco was an epiphany for me because, you know, it was a lot more of a sophisticated urban setting than either Dallas or Fort Worth.
Mhm.
You know, I felt like I've been living in Palookaville
Yeah, I mean,
by comparison.
and San Francisco in the 80s was still affordable. Like you could still live affordably there. You could live south of Market or in the Mission District, and you know you could still live pretty well. There was a food explosion happening there. I mean, that's I was there in hanging out all through the 80s, and it was a very interesting. By the time the 90s come around and Willie Brown becomes mayor, it starts to turn into a very, very different place. And to this day now has evolved into kind of this very strange socialist, techno-fascist experiment. And that leads us into kind of our topic of the day and really your sweet spot and why I wanted to have you on the show. And that has to do with this idea of communitarianism. And I've got this post up on your site. And we've been kicking around Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, the dark version of the New Age here on this show and my other show for a couple of years now. And just recently, this word started to pop up, and it popped up through my connection with you. The amazing Polly was talking about this the other day on one of her videos. So this is really a term that we need to become familiar with, and I think you're going to be our Sherpa into communitarianism. So why don't we start there, and let's look at this idea of communitarianism, kind of where we are now, and then let's go back into the roots of time and see where this thing has evolved from, some of the stuff that we touched on yesterday. So let's dive into your Lark. Let's jump into the concept, current day, present day communitarianism.
Well, I think it's rooted in this age-old problem of the few seeking to rule over the many. And we can certainly trace it back as far back as we'd like. We can trace it from the time of agriculture's development and people being able to stay in one place. They were no longer hunter-gatherers exclusively, and so forth. People don't know that today that the smallest unit of political organization in Europe is in fact the commune. Most people don't know that the commune is rooted in medieval Europe, you know, the concept of the walled village. And the idea of stratifying society really goes back to into antiquity as well. But I'd like to point to the history of corporations, you know, with ancient Rome. With ancient Rome, this gave rise to what we know today as the corporation, but it also gave rise to something called syndicalism, which is a type of socialism. And it's rooted in trade unionism, if you will. So today, a syndicalist organization is not only the Wobblies that we popularly know of from the 30s. It would be any kind of workers' trade association, and that would include blue collar as well as white collar professional trade associations, and to include the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the American Bar Association, American Medical Association, American Psychological Association, and on and on and on. There are literally thousands of them in this country. And I think by and large, Americans have never really discussed this concept of syndicalism, but it goes right along with communalism, communism, fascism, and so forth and so on. And so when you have all these different flavors of uniting people for common cause or purpose, and examples throughout history, and then you roll them up into one new ball of wax, appropriate now for the late 20th and now the 21st century, we can say definitively that the best one-word answer to describe this ball of wax is indeed communitarianism. And that's because it's undergirded by EU communitarian law. The people in Europe, in those English-speaking countries, what they hear is community law or EU law. But the fact is that it comes from acquis communautaire, which is the French translated into English, communitarian law. And so when you think about it, if you're going to have a one world system of global management or governance, and you have contractual relationships between a multinational corporation in, say, Germany, has another contract with another one from the States, and then simultaneously, regarding fulfillment of that contract, to another multinational corporation in the People's Republic of China, and there arises a contract dispute which requires adjudication in a court of law, which law will hold. And so what we find is that back in the 90s, we would see a contract clause. It said simply the supremacy of communitarian law. And it was a clause, it was in the fine print. And that's really what it boils down to. And so there's no discussion outside of legal circles about this thing called acquis communautaire or community acquis or communitarian law, and especially amongst Americans. And that for me is very troubling. So, even Europeans don't discuss it. I'm talking about just regular folks like you and me.
Right. So we're talking about specifically now language that has been created inside of this compact of the European Union. Is that correct?
I think so, because that is the model legal legislation that's being superimposed, overlaid, rolled out, if you will, across the world to unite everything. And of course, it's this, we live in a time of instant communication. So as everybody's connected, the world is now a much smaller place.
Right.
And so these people justify this entire philosophy, this religion, if you will, because the world is a much smaller place. And we have to cooperate. We all have to get along. We have to save Mother Earth,
right,
for instance.
Right.
And what this will lead to, of course, is frankly techno-slavery. Because remember that a technology is a tool. That's all it is. And man loves his tools. We're connected by perhaps our oldest technology through language itself. Language itself is a technology or a tool which facilitates communication. And then, of course, we love the tools which make life easier for us. Going back to the spear, the anvil, the axe, the plow, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And then coming forward in modern times, we love everything connected to the internet. And, it's going to be, it's rather much like Aldous Huxley spoke about in California back in the 60s, that man would so love his servitude that he can't imagine living without it.
Right.
Today, these young people are brought up to believe, just like the article at the World Economic Forum, it's 2030, I have no privacy, I own nothing, and life could never be better. Right. Couldn't be better.
This is the exact opposite of the conversation we were having with Ben. And that conversation was about complete ownership over your immediate reality and everything that you're responsible for in that reality. And this is the other side of that duality, which is nobody's responsible for anything, but they also don't own anything as a result of that. And this is really right in the you know, it's right in the pocket of Agenda 2030, where that's really the plan and the goal, where you won't even own your clothes, right? I mean, that's really what it's going to boil down to.
Well, I think it goes to you won't even own your own mind, nor have the right to ownership of it and
Right,
or your psychophysical being, your body.
right.
And that's really where it's going.
Yeah, yeah.
You
You and
know,
I talked a little bit about that Celeste Solon
yeah.
video, and that's exactly what she lays out. And people are, and especially, I hate to say this, but you know, younger people have been dosed on technology so much that they see this as kind of just the next extension or the next novelty, or the next thing that's available to them. And yeah,
What this does is it breeds dependency, codependency, and interdependence. And it stands opposed to, as they say, individualism or independence, I would say, also to personal autonomy,
mhm.
exercise of free will, words like freedom and liberty. I mean, this kind of language is thought passe. It won't do.
Yeah,
And this is what I'm concerned about, because I think techno slavery is a very real phenomenon. We'll see it before our lives end. I think it's going to be like the 1920s Evgeny Zamyatin novel entitled We, where all the inhabitants live in a glassed city
mhm,
and they're not allowed to leave because they've rewilded everything.
mhm.
And you're not allowed in nature except by permission.
Right, right. Yep, yep. Let's talk a little bit about the EU. Obviously, in order for the EU to come into fruition, they had to theoretically abolish nationalism. So none of those countries really exist anymore as countries per se. They may have a uh, a diluted national identity, but they don't exist. So they've eliminated nationalism in order to create the EU, which is, you know, part of this formula. Some of the roots of the EU originate in the work of a group called the Club of Rome. And I wanted to touch on that with you a little bit today. And I wanted to get your historical take on the Club of Rome and what they set out to do and kind of where we are as part of their roadmap, not only for the EU, but for the rest of the planet.
Well, sure. And we can go back further, really, to Pan Europa and the practical idealism by Count Richard Coudenhove Kalergi. The idea of a uh, mixed race Europe and the dissolution of the nation state. And really, it's trending towards regionalism. Regionalism is socialism, and really communitarianism, in my view, is world socialism. But it's of a different variance and a kind and a stripe than what people who are wedded to the ideas of, say, Marxism
Mm-hmm.
or National Socialism might cling to. It's a hybridization of all of those things. And frankly, it brings together a lot of elements that when you view it in its totality, there's enough in it for no one to like. And but coming forward to the Club of Rome, I think his name was King and some others. They just, you know, those Club of Rome white papers are really kind of integral to understanding the world we have today, because of course it was all about resource allocation, and it's about waste, and it's about environmental pollution, and there's too many people. That's a big problem with these people. We've got to do something about it, but we have to do something about it that's ethical, you know, bearing in mind that we're really talking about a soft kill or a genocide,
Mm-hmm.
a process of eliminationism. And so you can actually conjure up a lot of complex computer models for how to accomplish this without people being unaware or being aware today. So that's what we're seeing too with the rollout of, for instance, this COVID-19. You know, that was a psyop,
Sure.
but it's tied to an even larger agenda. And in my view, it's tied to the fact that the truth is this, you know, I say this, big tech is not your friend. And yet myself included, we all love this technology. We can't imagine our lives without it. We love this technology, and yet it's this very technology, in my view, that will enslave us. And we have to remember what happened after World War II, you know, with those Macy conferences and the rise of the of cybernetics, the cybernetic theory. And yeah, that Club of Rome and those white papers are important. I don't know what I can add to them, except that they sounded a lot of the themes that emerged from them, you know, like the late great planet Earth, if you recall, back in the day. And then I think, did we talk about the things that led to that? Like, for example, Silent Spring by Rachel Carson.
We touched a little bit on Rachel Carson. We talked a little bit about Bill McKibben, and we got into the whole small is beautiful bit with Dwayne Elgin.
Right.
Yes, we talked a little bit about that yesterday.
And there's a lot of American people today, people around the world, that are just thoroughly enamored with that. And there's a lot of good thinking in those people's minds. However, when you take it to its extreme, to its logical extension, it's tantamount to slavery for everyone.
Right. It's sort of like this, you know, this version of feel-good austerity, right? I mean, you know, we're going to turn the clock back, you know, 500 years in terms of our lifestyle, and we're going to feel a lot better about ourselves as a result of this. And that's always been kind of part of the ecological or the eco movement. But now it's been completely amplified. And of course, you know, Greta Thunberg and the climate change people have taken this whole thing to another level.
Yeah, there was something on my desktop that I can't access that I think would be useful, that I mentioned it during an interview last night, but I can't access it from my screen because how would I shrink this so I can access my
so what I can do is I want to come back to this, right? And
Please,
I want to go over some of these various isms that are part of the wheel of communitarianism. We'll come back to that. I'll do a stop share, and then what I'm going to do is, let's see, I will. I'm going to, I think, as an attendee or as a panelist, you could do a screen share. So you can go into the share screen function, and then you can find what's on your desktop, and then you can click on that. If you can't do that, let me know. I'll promote you to a host and then depromote you.
I can provide you a link, and if you want to pull that up, Robert, or give you just give you the title and you can search it.
You know what you could do? We got a chat function right here.
Yeah.
I'll send you a chat. You can just put your link right in that chat function.
Okay. Let me see if I can do that.
Okay.
Now I need to find the Zoom screen. There we are. And the chat function is right here. Very good. Yeah, if you want to pull that up, this will more succinctly address what we were just talking about.
Okay.
And that's an important article. I believe that man is Canadian, and this is from the year 2000, prior to 9/11.
Click on that link. And let's see what we got here. So this is from 2000.
Yes.
All right, let me get back into Zoom. Do a screen share.
Communitarianism is also a religion.
Yeah, this is where the New Age.
Yes.
comes in.
That's what I wanted to tie together.
All right, here we go.
It's a religio philosophy, if you will.
So the author here is Karl Krebs, Educating for Pagan Change, Earth Day, and the First National Teach-In. So why don't we get into like some of these bullet points here? So this is from the Environmental Handbook, prepared for the First National Environmental Teach-In. What do we do about ecology? What we do about ecology depends on our natures, our ideas of the man-nature relationship. More science and more technology are not going to get us out of this present ecological crisis until we find a new religion. By the way, this comes through that work, Changing Images of Man, that I talked to you about yesterday.
Yeah, I still want to access that. I think that would be interesting.
No new set of basic values has been accepted in our society to displace those of Christianity. Hence, we shall continue to have a worsening ecologic crisis until we reject the Christian axiom. That's interesting.
Well, this would be the way of the conqueror, though. Yes.
Yeah.
Destroy all the other religions but your own.
Right, exactly. Since the roots of our trouble are so largely religious, the remedy must essentially be religious. Whether we call it that or not, we must rethink and refeel our nature and destiny. That's Lynn White, Jr., Historical Roots of the Ecologic Crisis. New perspectives come out of the wilderness. Jesus, Zoroaster, Moses, Muhammad went to the wilderness and came back with messages. It was from the wilderness and the people who knew the wilderness, the first concern about pollution and environmental decay came. Now that's a very interesting sentence, right? Because I think a lot of us, myself included, can find real value in nature, right? That there is a real, like, inherent spiritual value in nature itself. And that we can, and if we're attuned to it, we can understand the interconnected processes. And we begin to drop our own kind of civilized, mind forms. There's a new reality that can emerge through that relationship. But what they're saying here, essentially, is that, okay, we've had these prophets come out of nature. And as a result, we find out, well, guess what? The world's filled with pollution and decay. So we can apply that as an axiom and as a principle. That's interesting. That's like some form of co-optation.
Yes, I would agree. I think our connectedness to nature, though, is really kind of vital. Once we lose that, it's going to harm us in innumerable numbers of ways. And yet, that's what we stand to lose.
And this is exactly the first stage of what we've seen here with the lockdowns, right? The parks were closed, the beaches were closed, any kind of recreation was closed. We were basically in, a home confinement situation.
We're being socially engineered and or acculturated or socialized in new ways, which are quite apart from our own enculturation in terms of the way we were raised. And I go into that in my website, where I simply reference the difference between enculturation, which may be described as the process of learning how to use a fork at the dinner table, versus acculturation, where a foreign culture subsumes your own, rather much like the Borg in Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
Resistance is futile. You will be assimilated.
Right.
Kind of a thing.
Is that where memetics comes into play in that model?
Well, memetics is all about what is going to occupy the mind space of the body politic and the individual. So, man is essentially a creature who is an aper and a oneer. An aper is a person who learns by rote, by repetition. He uses mnemonic devices, for instance. A oneer is a unique and one-of-a-kind individual. And see, this is something that we always prized in America. You know, we wanted to be rugged individualist. And, you know, there was a difference between a person who carved out a new nation and the person who is now a suburbanite or a city dweller. You know, there's a difference between people that actually depend upon the dirt for their livelihoods and those who depend upon the grocery store.
Right.
You know, but I think it's this is a very important article for anyone
Get
to
into
read.
some of this here. So this is one of these are the key sort of talking points from this article.
And it goes to the Club of Rome too, Robert, because remember they were, you know, this is the birth of environmental law, which really began in 1970 with the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And so it's now a very sophisticated, mature form of law, which undergirds what we're seeing today.
And a lot of this has actually become pretty integrated in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So stabilizing the U.S. population should be declared a national policy. Immediate steps should be taken to legalize voluntary abortion, sterilization, and provide these services free. Well, they're not free, but they're pretty damn cheap. Remove all restrictions on the provision of birth control, information, and devices. Provide these services free, so including minors. The school age to indoctrinate our youth, our children, has gone all the way down into kindergarten in many school districts. Make such education available at appropriate levels. The appropriate has clearly been redefined. Launch government-sponsored campaign for population control, and in the media comparable to the present anti-smoking campaign. Now, I'm not necessarily sure we've gotten there yet, but they've gone about this in a very interesting way, right? So instead of coming out and saying, we don't want you to have more kids, this is a kind of a governmental policy, but what we'll do is we'll reassign sexual identity, and we'll atomize what it is to be a man or a boy or a girl, and then we'll offer procedures in order to curtail any kind of biological reproduction. So they've found a workaround with that, which is, I think, kind of a fairly devious workaround. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think when I first started doing my research in the law libraries of various universities online, I found that beginning in the early to mid 90s, there was this love affair with what they termed reflexive law. And reflexive law is described as soft law. In other words, we live in a, you know, we're basically ruled by administrative state today since post-World War II. And so a lot of these agencies of what we think of as government have taken it upon themselves to really making law. And but what they will tell you is that they're enforcing policy.
Right.
And let's always remember that in a communitarian and or a totalitarian police state, it is policy which rules. Note the connection between policy and police. So this is what soft law is all about. And regarding what you were describing about the transgenderism and all this other kind of stuff, yeah, let's always remember that the conqueror wants to completely unmoor or untether you from the very foundations of the life that you heretofore had known that or had been socialized to. Because we're talking about a cultural conquest in a sense too.
Right.
Would you say that's true?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you'd have to have a cultural conquest. You'd have to change the culture and basically obliterate, you know, all the symbols, all the roots, all the moorings, so that something new could be brought in its place. We've seen this happen, and we're seeing it happen right now before our very eyes. I mean, we've witnessed since 311 this so-called sea change where, we didn't celebrate Easter, okay? We did not celebrate Easter. Whether you're, a Christian or not, I mean, it's kind of a big deal in some ways that this thing that marks our relationship with the seasons was essentially eliminated, right? And even now, post Easter, there are a number of people who cannot return to their church. And again, I don't care whether you're religious or not, or whether you believe in God or Jesus or go to a church, like that theoretically should be available to people. But by removing that, now we have conquest, right? Now we're beginning to see, this idea of the beliefs and the faiths and the belief systems, some, not all, by the way, being overturned. We already saw this, in the making over the last 2 to 3 years, where they began to remove the statuary from the South that theoretically related to the Civil War. So we're like, neck deep into this transition now. And what we're going to see moving forward is an acceleration of what's been happening. And it's going to happen at warp speed now. And I'm not, I mean, I think we can put some brakes on it in an interesting kind of way, in a different kind of way. But we're going to watch this thing unroll very quickly. What are your thoughts around that, Lark?
Well, of course, since I've been steeped in this for 16 years now, I see it so pervasive today, it's almost scary. But what is really scary for me is that there are very few people talking about it from the big picture perspective, even from the perspectives that you're bringing to light right now, looking at the Club of Rome, looking at the idea of the European Union and the like. There's a historical element that has to be discussed too, because remember, the winners and the conquerors always write the history.
Yeah.
And the truth is that what I have learned, I came to the realization maybe 10 years ago that I was provided a slave's education. And I think that's going to be part and parcel of what all of us are going to be confronting in the future with our progeny. We have to look at the fact that today humanism and scientism are also religions. And I like to say that the nexus of humanism and scientism is this thing called probabilism. And probabilism posits that in the absence of certainty, that probability will do. Well, this fits right in with moral relativism, the idea of conflating things like values, morals, and ethics. They want everything to be collapsed to one. You've heard this term of art, oneness, the one. This is what's happening with communitarianism. It's the dialectical struggle or fight or debate between all opposites. Any opposite that you can imagine. In fact, if you want to contribute to the demise of the populace at large, then just get involved in a heated public debate. Pick a side, any side.
Yeah.
Because this is at the root of what Marx himself said that they would do to employ this Hegelian dialectic to bring about this future system. And he didn't necessarily think it would be known as communism. Even back in the day, back in the 19th century. Mm-hmm. So what we have today is we have this Hegelian dialectic that is constantly working. Because remember, every time you have a problem, you anticipate the reaction, you're going to have a synthesis. Well, a new problem always arises. In fact, pick a problem, any problem. Pick a thesis, an antithesis is anticipated. And so what these people attempt to do is they want to control all sides of the arguments, all sides of the debate, because then they can control the outcome. And that's what we're seeing today, with the control of the media, with the public schools, the so-called P20 education system that we have in place, that's preschool all the way through graduate school, that really has become school to work. It's a cradle to grave system.
Well,
And of
they've
course,
changed that. They changed that. They wanted to give people enough skills and intelligence so that they could go into the workforce and help create wealth for the corporations and the corporate owners. Well, that's changed now. They don't need that anymore. They don't need the workforce. You know, we're about ready to hit the massive AI revolution. And we've seen the change in education happen over the last decade in what they call value-based education, right? So they're introducing this value-based system. They're not really teaching kids how to solve problems or have critical thinking. You know, they're indoctrinating this value-based kind of cosmogony. What's also interesting about the education system, even outside of like Common Core, is that they stress group projects, right? They're always stressing the group project.
that's true.
Yeah. It's not like you go out and do something and you get really good at it and you show everybody else what you can do. You have to do it with a group of people. And that's pretty much de facto in the American school system now.
Learning how to think is not important. If you need the answer to something, you have the group, and my goodness, you have your smartphone.
Right. Right. And what do they
So
teach within the group? They teach something called consensus. And consensus is not really, you know, you can arrive at consensus and it may not be the truth or it may not be the right answer. But as long as everybody agrees on it, that's what their outcome is going to be, right? That's the Delphi technique in action. You've studied the Delphi technique, right? You know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
did you know the Rand Corporation was created or incorporated on the same day that Israel declared its independence?
Now, that I did not know, and that is very interesting information. So we're talking 1948. What, May 1948? Is that right?
Yes. And of course, remember LifeLog, which was a DARPA project
Right.
that morphed into Facebook.
Right. Right. Interesting stuff. I wanted to go back to your website because I wanted to cover a few things.
I put another link for you and that you can look at your convenience.
I saw that.
Regarding bioethics,
Yeah.
Anthony Fauci's wife.
Why don't we just bring that up now, since you brought that into the mix? This is what the amazing Polly had uncovered. So we're gonna dive into this. Since you found this, Lark, why don't you break this down?
Well, I have to pull it up here.
I have it on share screen right now. You can see it.
Okay, let me see. Oh, there we go. Well, I mean, I'm not sure I'm the qualified as, you know, I think really all it requires is someone to read it for, you know, maybe 2 minutes. And you'll find out what these people are, you know, what is their frame of mind and how is it that they think. They have somehow justified it in an ethical sense, experimentation on the human populace without their permission. In other words, it violates all tenets of contract law.
So Christine Grady is Anthony Fauci's wife.
That's right.
Let's be clear about that, right? And she states right from the jump that these are her views.
Well, but it's the consensus of the communitarian bioethicists today. And now these bioethicists are important to realize the place that they hold, because today the sciences have all been thrown together. That would be the physical sciences, the life sciences, and the social sciences. And, you know, remember, Rahm Emanuel is a bioethicist.
You mean Zeke?
I mean Zeke Emanuel. Yeah. He's the one that came up with the so-called duty to die principle.
Right.
And he had a hand in the creation of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act.
He was one of the architects of Obamacare.
And that is communitarian through and through. If you want to see an example of communitarianism in action, that's it. And there are many more examples. Remember, these people always want to justify what they're doing so that they can sell it. And that's why studying of meme theory is important, along with cybernetic theory is important, because it's all part and parcel of the same communitarian agenda. Because with meme theory came from 1976. The word meme, M-E-M-E, was coined by Richard Dawkins in his 76 book called The Selfish Gene. And I myself wasn't even introduced to this word until I think 2006, because I studied marketing at one time. I was at a branding conference and I learned about it, and I was fascinated by it because this is what people on Madison Avenue are steeped in today. It's what military intelligence people are steeped in today. Anybody that is looking to sell a product, a service, or an idea is involved in memetics today, meme theory and or memetic warfare, including our own intelligence agencies and U.S. military. So it's the future of war is memetic war. As Callie Lassen said, the one who dreamt up the Occupy Wall Street and sold it to George Soros and Hillary Clinton's State Department. Whoever has the memes has the power. Right. And so that's what I mean by mind space. The words that occupy your head are the ones that are going to drive your actions. It's just that simple. And so what they want to do is they want to drive out the words that are not fitting with their narrative within their agenda from your mind. And they're going to control you with things like propaganda, or what I term agitprop, appeal to emotion,
right,
and the like. They want to literally take over your mind.
Right.
Mind control is a very real phenomenon today in such an interconnected, smaller world. And particularly with this technology, I've spoken too about the grin technologies, which are going to help bring about this techno slavery. And that would be genetics, robotics, information, and nanotech. And the watchword there is innovate, innovate, always push, 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 push. The more they can control the resources of the world, they can control the movements of the people in the world, and the more that they can control. And they can now solidify their control in the hands of fewer and fewer people. People will all be involved with machine learning today. And, we will have the sense that there's really not a damn thing we can do without gaining permission from the group.
Yeah, they've already, instituted the psychology of the greater good, which, we've been discussing here on this show and some of the other broadcasts on 15 Minutes of Flame. We've been, dissecting this idea of the greater good. And now here we are with COVID-19, the coronavirus, the establishment of mask versus non-mask, and this idea of the greater good, and the sacrifice that people are having to perform in their lives. I mean, this is going to be a very common theme moving forward, this idea of the greater good and sacrificing the individual self, or the idea of the self for the group as a whole. And
communitarians believe that nobody has rights which are unaccompanied by duties and responsibilities. And you have to say that over and over in your head to realize its import and how that's going to impact upon your life going forward. You see examples of it everywhere you turn. They suggest that you must balance the rights of the individual with those of the rights of the community at large.
Right.
And so I regard communitarianism as the camel's nose under the tent. And it's such a significant word that what I have witnessed just in the past 15 or 16 years that I've been researching is it's become so pervasive. It's like you don't even know where to begin. to discuss it, because it doesn't matter where you start, you're going to see the evidence of it. And you see it within the actions of ordinary people and how they behave. Because at the end of the day, this is what they want to do. If they can control your mind, they can control your actions, your activities, what you do. You basically now, we live in a world that is, we can say, is a dirigiste economy. And a dirigiste economy is a command and control economy. We always have to remember that, you know, back in the day, we had what was called real science or hard science, and then we understood that there was soft science or pseudoscience. Well, believe it or not, political science, sociology, even economics, these are all pseudosciences.
Right.
And today we've got all these so-called experts being trotted out in front of us, and we're so inundated, we feel assaulted, barraged from every side, that we give in to the diktats of the group as a matter of course. Because of course, we're an agreeable creature. We don't see the profit in creating dissension, creating problems for ourselves. And so that's what I discuss with this entry at my website called the 9 words. I describe them as part and parcel of the 3 C's. If you want to know if you're part of the problem or part of the solution, you only need to remember the 3 C's. Are you compliant? Are you complacent? Or are you complicit? That's how pervasive it is today.
Right.
And remember, this word complacent is spelled C-O-M-P-L-A-I-S-A-N-T, as opposed to complacent, like we're ordinarily accustomed to seeing the word C-O-M-P-L-A-C-E-N-T, which is intellectual lethargy. Complacent, spelled the former way, is that you are agreeable, you're eager to please, you want to go along to get along. And this is part of our nature. So these people have been studying us for the longest time. Probably no creature in history has been more studied than the human being. And this is borne out by sociologists and psychologists, economists, political scientists, all of these people involved in the soft sciences today. You know, they want to control the narrative. And even within those Macy conferences post World War II, they were centered around this whole idea of cybernetic theory. And they even invented a new science. It was called applied systems analysis. And I provide a link at my website so that you can see that there's actually a timeline going back into antiquity for this thing that we call cybernetic theory, or now applied systems analysis. Remember, with cybernetic theory, it always requires biological input, and that would be you. That would be me.
Right.
It cannot work. The machine cannot work unless you provide biological input, because they want to create what's called biofeedback loops so that they can control you up here. And when they can control you up here, they can control what you do with your hands, your mouth, your eyes, your feet, and everything else.
This is a really interesting document. I was just kind of scrolling through it. And if you look at kind of how this thing is laid out, right?
She buys into the germ theory of disease, by the way.
Yeah. And because what we see here is like, okay, well, let's look at some.
See the word utilitarian?
Utilitarian is definitely in there. Let's look at some historical examples where research on humans and individuals actually worked and was beneficial, right? So there's Pasteur, and then there's Meister, then we have Ignaz Semmelweis, and then we have, of course, the ultimate scam artist, Jonas Salk, right? These are all like theoretically good or solid examples of human research programs. And then she drops in this guy. This is Harry Beecher, right? It's like, no, this is not how it's done. This is not how you do it, right? So she sets you up by having these three characters, these three historical characters, who somehow provide the roadmap, and then here's the non-roadmap. Right? And it's very, very interesting, very interesting. And then, of course, we have the PHS syphilis studies, which go wrong when treated for 40 years. So it's not problem, reaction, solution, but we see that there in her work, like, here's the canon of who did things right. These are examples of what went wrong, and how do we make sure that moving into the future, we don't replicate those two bad apples in the bunch, right?
She cites this Belmont report too in 1979, which is well worth looking into.
Exactly.
Yeah, very often with communitarians, they manufacture problems by and large. Remember, pick a problem, any problem. And then they anticipate the reaction. And then they seek to control all sides of the resultant debate, the conflict between the thesis and the antithesis. And that's because they already have a predetermined solution or synthesis in mind. And in a communitarian world, it's always a communitarian synthesis. And that's why it behooves us, as, older people who have some life experience, who perhaps have some time to actually do some reading, who are not, tethered to a job and a mortgage and raising a family and all these other kind of things, to alert the people that we care about that are younger than us, call it the human population, if nothing else, your own family and friends. If we don't know about the lay of the land and during a time of war, how are we going to be successful in winning that war?
Right. Absolutely. If you don't know the historical premise for what you're dealing with, you're not really going to understand, where we are in the current landscape of this so-called reality. We talked a little bit about the Club of Rome. Very important. We could go back even further in the Kalergi document, the Kalergi strategy that Lark brought up. We could move it forward to the Rio Summit in 1992, where the deals for Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 are signed. You and I talked about Suzuki's daughter yesterday, who was kind of the forerunner of Greta Thunberg, where she went up before this group of so-called scientists and politicians, young, very articulate, and sold the future of doom to them, right? She was Greta Thunberg 1.0 and was very effective at selling that. So that's another very important kind of time, is that Rio Summit period, when they sign all the documents that lead up to ICLE, sustainable development, sustainable cities, and essentially being rolled out right now before our very eyes.
Yeah, I would encourage people to take a look at my site. None of these papers require any real-time investment. You can read everything there in under 10 minutes. And some of them you can read in 2 and 3 minutes. And realize that what I've tried to do is I've tried to take a whole lot of words and discussion surrounding the topic and try to present them in a way that was concise and yet comprehensive at the same time. The idea is to take the information that I've brought to light and then add it to the own information bank that you yourself have, and learn from it. Take it, steal these words, if you will, to borrow a Abby Hoffman.
Right.
I want people to do that because, see, you're going to make it better. The individual will make it better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what counts.
Yep.
See, because what I champion is the rights of the people that are not from academia, that don't sit around all day and get paid the big bucks to conjure up this crap.
Right.
I champion the the rights of the common man. And I'll tell you this, that I learned from Nikki Rapana, who was my early mentor in this topic, the author with her daughter of the Anti-Communitarian Manifesto, which you can search online. You can actually read it. There is available. She said that what these people fear more than anything else are the plain instincts of the common man.
Mhm.
But see, these plain instincts, what I call instinct and intuition, as I wrote about in Trust Your Gut at my website,
Mhm.
these are the things that are precisely being bred out of us. You don't need to learn how to think,
Right, right. This is
only
why,
what to think.
yeah, this is why they indoctrinate our youth into critical theory, right? Critical theory. Really, what they need to really get into is understanding their gut and their feeling and following it, along with some real practical problem solving and critical thinking skills. Not critical theory, that's a whole different thing, right? Critical theory is indoctrination.
Say what we're witnessing today is can be correctly termed creative destruction.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You know, I saw an interesting quote from Steve Bannon, which I did not see before. And Steve Bannon said, I am a Leninist. He says this. He says, I am a Leninist, and I advocate the creative destruction of a system in order to bring in or indoctrinate a new one. And I was really surprised when I heard Steve Bannon say that I am a Leninist. That was interesting.
What I have discovered, Robert, is that there is nobody on the national stage that has a face in the media that is not propounding communitarianism today. They would not be there if they weren't serving a purpose.
Right.
These people are, they consider themselves very clever. And believe me, if they get more than 5 minutes FaceTime on the TV, it's for a reason.
Right.
By the way, Steve asked about what strategies do I suggest for beating and dismantling. The entry 9 words at my website. It says, it lays it right out, because I talk about how to overcome actual slave speak and communitarian code speak. They work together in tandem. And you have to read something that I suggest everybody read. It's called The Anatomy of Slave Speak. A link is provided there. And then realize that what I term communitarian code speak is akin to Orwellian newspeak or doublethink. And in fact, in Nikki's book, The Definitive Anti-Communitarian Manifesto, in the appendices, she has something entitled Communitarian Buzzwords, but more interestingly, something called Big Mother's Double Tongue Dictionary. And that's significant because you can see all these words being bandied about and you had no idea where they came from or what they really meant. And it's sort of like when you hear words like quality learning, and you're a parent and you have children in public schools, you're thinking, well, my goodness, that's wonderful. They're concerned about quality education for my child. But no, quality learning has a particular nuance to its definition, its interpretation of meaning, if you will. Remember, interpretation of meaning is important because, you know, within Catholicism, there's the word casuistry, which is interpretation of meaning. But in Judaism, we have this word pilpul, P-I-L-P-U-L. Gilad Atzmon, the saxophonist.
I've interviewed Gilad. Yeah.
Yeah, he just put up an article which I thought was timely. It's just a pilpul for beginners.
Mm-hmm.
Again, P-I-L-P-U-L. And it's useful to see this because the way we think words are universally thought and understood, the way they're defined, is not always the case.
Right.
And particularly today, because everybody's specialty has specialized language, you know, your occupation. You know, I used to be a chef and a restaurateur. The language is specialized.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you were a chemist of a particular type, your languages specialize.
Right.
And, that's why we hear things like free trade and sustainable development and diversity. And these words just fly past our heads. But if you just tune into a Sunday talk show, and I haven't watched television for 10 years or better now, but I remember Fareed Zakaria, GPS, Global Public Square, when it first inaugurated on CNN.
Mhm.
He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and that's what his show is all about. He was talking using communitarian code speak, as were all his guests, and it's still true to this day. So that's what they're talking about on C-SPAN and these other places. But unless you're familiar with the jargon, you're going to miss it entirely.
Okay, so I'm going to have a link to Lark's website, and you can find the 9 words and a number of other articles that he's distilled, so you can become more aware of and understand the concept of communitarianism, which embraces a number of isms that come together, right? So it's a very interesting and very complex, in some ways, concept. But once you dive in and start making the connections, I think it become pretty clear. So what's going on in chat, Steve?
Gosh, well, it's been pretty active. Everybody is happy that they've been introduced to Lark. I was wondering, because we always in religion there's the Antichrist and then there's Christ. So this whole system is the Antichrist system. It's a perversion. It's an inversion. And I was wondering what your thoughts would be about, what's going on versus, our spiritual potential. I've always thought that Christ, if he's going to return, is going to be through our hearts. And, that's one of the ways to approach this is to not play the game, but we still need to be doing what we should be doing. Do you think that's how much should we be trying to counter what's coming at us versus developing our own inner Christ-like abilities?
Well, we have to recognize that capitalism and communism were both economic systems.
Mm.
And really what communitarianism is a coalescence of these uber rich, transgenerationally wealthy trust fund baby types with the ideals of cultural Marxism, quite frankly. And so you have to ask yourself, well, what is my place in this world? Am I feeding the beast, shall we say? And I kind of think like Buckminster Fuller thought. If you want to change anything, you have to change. You can't change it within their system. You have to change within yourself.
Right.
And that means it really begins with the individual. And so we can't just keep pointing our fingers outwardly as the source of our angst or our problems, our difficulties in life. We have to turn within. And we have to recognize if we actually care about values like personal autonomy and exercise of free will, do we deign to own and control our own minds and bodies? Do we wish to continue to own and control the fruits of our labors, for instance? Are these things important, yes or no? And so these are the fundamental questions which must be asked. And I always say that people need to look within. I use the word introspection.
Right.
And so whatever your religious bent, then you need to ask yourself: Are you really following the tenets of your beliefs? Do you stand on those beliefs?
Right. From the chat, Oswald Spengler asks, are you familiar with Kurt Doolittle's proprietarianism?
I find it troubling.
Why is that?
I think it's designed to discombobulate the people who are the thinkers amongst us.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, even within a lot of bad ideas, there's some good. Okay. So uh, I've spent a few hours looking into it, and what I find is troubling. So
Okay.
that's all I can say about it without being more. In fact, I have to say I dismissed it some months
Okay.
ago, and maybe that's unfair. Perhaps someone could uh, challenge my thinking on that, but I don't. I find it, frankly, as uh, contributing to the problem, not to the solution.
Right. Right. I wonder too. Um, are we dealing just with humans with this problem, or do you know anything about uh, interdimensionals or anything like that? What is it? AI is definitely in play here, and from my understanding, the singularity, they're going to link us with AI to the cloud. Um, but are the elite serving non-human masters, in your opinion?
I think they're like everyone else in this life. We're all guided by our own self-interest.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a fact of life. Whether we realize it or not, even the next breath you take is an act of, some would say, greed, but
Mm-hmm.
it's largely an unconscious act. We want to breathe. We want to live.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because with the how long this has been coming, and the commercials and just how smooth it's all been, it almost seems impossible that a human could do that. But um, maybe so.
Well, what I've discovered, I put in my first garden this year.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to understand, I was a former European trained chef. I was a caterer. I was a restaurateur. I was a serial entrepreneur. But I had to get out of that business in 1994 because I realized, try as I might, I was part of organized crime,
Mm.
poisoning the population. I couldn't escape it and still compete. And, it troubled me for a long time because I was idealistic as a young man. I wanted to do something that was worthwhile. I remember my parents, when I was a teenager, one wanted me to be a doctor or a dentist, the other one an attorney. I told my parents, I said, quite honestly, I can't participate in organized crime because that's what it is. These are criminal protection rackets. And so, the fact of the matter is do you want to live your life on your terms? Now, that's not necessarily selfish. I never wanted someone else to be responsible for me. I knew that ultimately I was responsible for my own actions. And I've certainly made lots of mistakes. We all have. I have never wanted to be harmful to somebody else, even people that harmed me. I just didn't have it in me. But, there are people, as you know, that really couldn't give a piddly damn about the little people, the people that are insignificant. And that's why we're seeing this economy crashing as we stand right now. Because, see, in a communist caste system, which is really not unlike the capitalist caste system, what we see as always the first target with the communists is the bourgeoisie. That would be the middle class. They have to destroy the middle class, impoverish them, turn them into wage slaves and, people without property so that they can be weakened. Why? So they can accrue the wealth unto themselves at the top, which is the intelligentsia.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, they have to expand the nomenclatura because the intelligentsia feels like they needed this expanded firewall between themselves and everyone else that they've looted.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it is. And when you look at a capitalist caste system, you have what? The the board of directors, you have the management, you have the laborers, you have the shareholders. You see, you have to go back to the division of labor theory and people like Bernard de Mandeville, who wrote The Fable of the Bees, to see how we're all being divided. And you notice how important the beehive is to symbolism back into antiquity. You know, these people want us compartmentalized, stratified, so that the one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing. And this way they can, by dividing us, they can conquer us, and we remain conquered and controlled. And
Yeah.
so then you have to ask yourself, where do I fit into this? Do I want to be swept up by this? Yes or no?
Yeah, that gets into this idea that we were talking about in the first hour, and the Manhattan Project being kind of this model of the new society where everybody is segmented and they're told to do whatever they're going to do to work on a specific project without really understanding or knowing completely what they're doing. So they worked out the bomb, but they were also working out the variable of a social model.
Yeah, and a lot of that was came from MIT, you know, which is where Norbert Wiener was a professor at during World War II and post-World War II. You know, his work was, you know, his magnum opus was written in 1948, but in 1950s, especially 1954, the year I was born, was the book called The Human Use of Human Beings, Cybernetics in Society. And that's what all of this AI and this big tech is all about. It's the human use of human beings. This is what marketers are all about. This is what crowdsourcing is all about.
Mm-hmm. The
You know,
Macy
you can't,
conference, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. Joseph Campbell's participation in that too.
So
read the entry at my site called The Coalescence of Cybernetics.
check out Lark's site. We got to wrap up today.
Okay.
We'll be back next week with obviously more guests. We don't know who yet. I'll be back on Sunday night with Sunday Night Astro Live. Lark, thanks again for being here today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and, nice meeting both of you.
We're connected. Stay in touch. I'm sure we'll pass information back and forth. And you're a fellow Texan. Steve, thank you for hanging out today and bringing your hammer, bringing your Thor hammer to the occasion. There we go. And I got to go pick up Rosie. She's at the vet. She's not feeling so well.
Uh-oh.
Which is why they called me during the show, which is why we got to wrap things up. So anyway, Chatlandia, thank you very much. Appreciate you. Love you. We'll be back on Sunday night. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible. We're going to have a ton of links on the show page. Lark, send me whatever you want that you think is relevant. I'll make sure that those links are a part of today's show too. Okay?
Very good. Well, thanks very much, gentlemen.
Bye for now.
Thank
Bye.
you.